Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel wherever you are in the world, and so much love to each and every one of you. I do hope you're doing incredibly well. I'm doing great, thank you very much, and I'm so delighted that you've joined me for tonight's story. But before we get started, go and get yourself something lovely to drink, something delicious and warm, or something cool and refreshing, and let's get started with tonight's story. But before we do, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Click the notification bell and the thumbs up. And let's continue with tonight's story. Dear Sarah and all your lovely listeners, Suzanne Chambers slammed down the brakes of her black SUV so violently hard that the car shook and juddered rather precariously as it came to an abrupt, very sudden, ungainly stop outside the school gates. If Suzanne's husband Niles could see her right now, he'd chastise her for being so cack-handed at parking her car. But Suzanne didn't care about that. Her mind was currently preoccupied with a tapestry of grievous concerns in regards to her teenage daughter Blakely, who had really knocked the wind out of her sails of late, as over the last couple of weeks Blakely had almost become unhinged. Everything had spiralled out of control last night, when Suzanne had uncovered her daughter's dark, rather dirty secret. And let's just say, there's some things as a parent you wish you'd never seen. Suzanne felt as if she was lost at sea, on one of those lifeboats, struggling desperately to find her bearings, and wondering if she would ever make it to shore, for the trajectory of her life seemed to be going downhill very fast, especially after the confrontation she'd had with Blakely last night. She really did feel rather like a pigeon that had got ensnared in the cat's sharp claws, for some of the foul language her daughter had used against her last night had left Suzanne feeling as wilted as a dying flower in a glass vase. Things had been so plain sailing when raising her older daughter Nina, who was now 25 years old, and Nina had given her no problems growing up. She was the kind of daughter that every parent would be delighted to raise as their own. She had been so helpful around the house, so incredibly obliging, and always fun to be around. Suzanne had expected Blakely to follow Nina's lead and be an undemanding teenager, not giving her any tumultuous challenges, but no such luck in that regard. Blakely of late had become the most obnoxious teenager on the face of the planet, as far as Suzanne was concerned, and currently her daughter seemed to only know how to spit out her stinging, very poisonous venom at her mother. And there had been times, over the last couple of weeks, that Suzanne felt like tearing her hair out. She had recently read somewhere that women who didn't have children looked 20 years younger than those that did, and if this was true, well, it came as no surprise to Suzanne. She felt like a 45-year-old woman going on 350. She had noticed several grey hairs had developed on her scalp of late that had not been there only days before, and if that wasn't bad enough, very deeply entrenched frown lines had mysteriously appeared between her brows, which also hadn't been there, and it made her look like a bad-tempered badger. It only served to highlight to Suzanne just how much stress Blakely had recently put her through. Suzanne felt as if she was perilously circumnavigating her life on a pair of roller skates, and clumsily colliding into everything that crossed her path. It would seem her tumultuous relationship with her daughter had become very fragile of late. Even her husband Niles had mentioned that the atmosphere in their house had become so incredibly tense that you could practically cut it with a knife. "Why do I get the funny feeling that you and Blakely are at loggerheads with each other?" he had said. "Is there something going on that I should know about?" "I don't know what you're talking about, love." Suzanne had laughed uneasily. "Everything is just fine. I guess I'm overexhausted. I've been running around a lot, you know." "You look more than a little tired, love. There's dark rings around your eyes. And Blakely looks pretty miserable too." "Oh, Blakely. Well, she's just had a little spat with Eloise, I suspect." Suzanne lied. "She'll get over it. You know what teenagers are like." Suzanne was determined not to let her husband Niles know what she had uncovered about her daughter, for there was no knowing how he'd react. Suzanne reflected over Nina, her older daughter, how she'd been when she'd been a teenager. The course with her had run so incredibly smooth, so much so, in fact, that when other parents at the time had complained bitterly about their out-of-control teenagers, Suzanne had felt little sympathy for them, for she didn't really understand or appreciate what they were talking about. But now that her young daughter Blakely had reached the age of 16 and was giving her grief, Suzanne perfectly understood now that not all teenagers were created even. She had no idea how good life had been, raising such an agreeable teenager, until of course she'd experienced the opposite end of the spectrum. Don't get me wrong, Suzanne loved her daughter Blakely very much indeed. She'd have moved heaven and earth for her daughter, and more besides. But at the moment, her obstinately cantankerous teenager had become as prickly as a porcupine, and was almost unapproachable. Suzanne's erratic driving that morning had been a sorry, rather beleaguered reflection of the inner turmoil going on inside her. She felt as if her mind was spinning around in circles, like the clothes in a spin-dryer. She could not recall a time in her life when she'd felt so grievously upset, so utterly dismayed, so completely betrayed, not only by her pugnacious daughter Blakely, but by that artful, cunning, scheming woman, Mrs. Laura Ferguson herself. Suzanne felt like an irate bull in a ring, desirous to go after the matador's bright red flag and tear it into shreds. Certainly Suzanne knew that if she owned a pair of formidable horns like a bull did, she knew exactly who she'd like to drive them into right now. If Suzanne ever so much as laid eyes on the likes of Laura Ferguson again, she would personally not be responsible for her actions. Suzanne had never understood why decent people, of both sound mind and character, committed treasonous acts of murder and unbridled violence. But right now, if she had the guts and the gumption to do it, she would quite literally murder that woman. Who the hell did Laura Ferguson think she was? And how dare she butt her nose into her daughter's life in the intrusive way she'd so obviously done, without even bothering to tell Suzanne about her unethical intentions. The unscrupulous woman hadn't bothered to mention any of this, precisely because she knew how Suzanne would react, and so she had furtively encouraged Blakely to make choices that were not suitable for a 16-year-old girl to make. I should have known that Eloise's mother was a bad influence on Blakely. I should have listened to Niles. Suzanne continued to scold herself as she sat in her SUV, listening to Reva McEntire singing her country western song about her broken heart. And the sad song only made Suzanne feel all the more miserable. Why was it that Suzanne's discerning husband Niles always was right about everything, and she was the one that ended up with egg on her face, looking ridiculously stupid, as she did right now? Suzanne had thought being liberally open-minded and reasonably easy-going about things was the best way to seamlessly conduct your life to a smooth-flowing orchestra. But it seemed her shrewd conservative husband Niles could see the errors in the small print that so easily get overlooked. Suzanne always thought that you should give people a second chance, even if your first impression of them was not very favourable. She recalled when they bought their first home, many years ago, her husband had said in disgust, "We can't possibly live here. The previous owners have left the place in a hideous mess." But Suzanne had seen through the chaos and insisted they bought the house, which they did at a bargain basement price, and Suzanne had painstakingly fixed the place up. And this was a decision that neither of them had regretted, for Suzanne had turned their dump of a home into one of the finest-looking houses on their street. Ostensibly, her husband Niles was quick to point out that houses are exceedingly different to people. Even so, Susan disapproved of judging anyone based on their colour, ethnicity, culture, or even on the way they dressed. She emphatically thought that every individual was entitled to express themselves both freely and individualistically. If they wanted to wear heavy-duty piercings in their ears, dye their hair bright pink or orange, or bungee jump off the Eiffel Tower in Paris, well, it was entirely up to them, was it not? Let's just say the way Laura Ferguson presented herself to the world left a lot to be desired. But that had been no concern to Suzanne, until now, of course. now that the woman's brazen influences had hurt her daughter Blakely, although doubtlessly Blakely wouldn't see it like that. Susan, like any other mother, wouldn't stand for that kind of nonsense. From the moment Suzanne's husband Niles had laid eyes on Laura Ferguson, he had not had anything good to say about the brassy woman. At the time, Suzanne had been affronted by her husband's unfair criticisms of Laura Ferguson, and had immediately leapt to her defence. But not any more. That ship had long since sailed, and Suzanne had had quite enough. You can only poke a gentle dog a few times before it'll finally growl and bite back. Suzanne was about to snap, and if there was anyone's hand she could bite right now, it was Laura Ferguson's, and she'd have loved to have dug her teeth very hard into that woman's flesh. Suzanne had naively, rather ignorantly, believed that just because Laura Ferguson dressed inappropriately and looked as trashy as a hooker standing on a street corner touting for business, didn't mean that she had loose morals. But her husband Niles had disagreed with her on this, saying that if you flaunted yourself like a woman of the night, wearing the most skimpy, revealing outfits, then you were sending out all the wrong signals, and you were going to attract the wrong kind of company. If you hang around in a seedy nightclub, are you going to meet people of high moral fibre? He'd ask his wife. To which Suzanne would reply, "What does a seedy nightclub have to do with Laura Ferguson?" And Niles had said, "It has everything to do with Laura Ferguson, for she would be very much at home in a seedy nightclub, don't you think?" What I'm trying to say, love, is I'm not happy with Al Blakely going over to the Fergusons' home and spending time with her best friend Eloise under that woman's roof. Laura Ferguson spells trouble to me, in every sense of the word, and I do not like the idea of Blakely being exposed to her promiscuous influences. But you don't know the woman's promiscuous, do you? You're just assuming she's like that. Why are you saying these unkind things? It's uncalled for, Niles. If I wear a short skirt that barely covers my backside, does that suddenly make me promiscuous? Suzanne had snapped angrily. It's not as cut and dried as that, sweetheart, and you know it. It's the whole look of Laura Ferguson. Yes, I admit I am judging her based on her appearances, but I'm sorry the signals she's giving off spell danger to me. If Eloise and Blakely want to spend time together, fair enough, but it needs to be done under our roof, where you can keep a firm eye on both of those girls. I don't trust Laura Ferguson as far as you can throw her, and I categorically believe she will be a bad influence on our daughter. I mean, surely you can at least agree, just from the way she dresses, that she's not a positive role model for any teenage girl. They're impressionable. Imagine if our daughter started dressing like Laura Ferguson. Think about that for a moment. That would be unacceptable. Suzanne had rolled her eyes in exasperation. Oh, I see, Niles. It's like that, is it? You think it's not safe for our daughter to hang around Laura Ferguson because she dresses like a tart. Is that it? Don't you think you're being far too judgmental, far too critical of the poor woman? What has she ever done to you? If that woman wants to dress like a hooker, that's her business, don't you think? She's free to express herself the way she likes. She likes to dress provocatively, and some women do, don't they? But that does not make her a bad person. And it certainly doesn't mean that Blakely can't spend time at Eloise's home, does it? I'm not being judgmental, Niles had said. I'm saying it as it is, love, even though I know you don't like what I'm saying. I just don't want our Blakely being influenced by a woman like that, who probably doesn't even own a skirt big enough to cover her derriere. Everything hangs out with her on full visual display, and I'm sorry, but it's vulgar. That woman is cheap and trashy, as brassy as you can get, and she's drawing unpleasant, unwanted attention to herself, and enjoying every second of it, I'm most sure. I don't want our Blakely getting caught up in company like that. It could potentially have a negative impact on her life. And as I keep saying, the next thing we know, Blakely could be wearing a skirt that does very little to cover up her modesty.
Don't get me wrong. I like Eloise very much. She's a sweet kid. But it's that mother of hers that is a walking liability. I know I don't know her, but I've seen enough to make a judgment of her, and my opinion is not a good one."
"Oh, don't be ridiculous, Niles. Listen to yourself, love. You're being so priggishly stuffy, so overly dramatic, so straight-laced. Yes, I agree with you to a certain extent. Laura Ferguson, well, the way she dresses, it doesn't leave much to the imagination. When I see her outside the school gates, going to collect her daughter, I do sometimes wish I had the courage to tell her that she looks so much nicer if she wore something more modest. But it's not my place to say anything, is it? What she chooses to wear is none of my business. It's a free world as far as I'm concerned."
"It shouldn't be so free that a mother of a young girl walks around the place so scantily clad that she might as well be wearing absolutely nothing."
"Well, you're not alone in your thoughts, Niles," said Suzanne. "I think most of the mothers at school disapprove very passionately about the way Laura dresses. But I think they may finally be beginning to understand that that is who Laura Ferguson is. She likes to dress trashy. I think it's undignified to have everything hanging out in the way she does. Who are we to judge her for the way she dresses or the choices she makes? If you must know, Laura Ferguson told me in confidence, rather proudly, that she'd spent a fortune on plastic surgery after acquiring a great deal of money from a hefty divorce settlement. She told me she wanted to reinvent herself, and that is what she's inevitably done. I remember she teasingly joked that she didn't spend all this money on her assets not to enjoy them to the fullest. I think her exact words were to me, "If I had a whopping diamond ring, I wouldn't let it gather dust in the safe, would I? Instead, I'd wear it on my finger every day so people could admire it." That's what she says she feels about her brand new body that she acquired from the surgeon's masterful scalpel. That didn't come cheap, I believe. I'll have you know she told me the money she spent on her body could have purchased a brand new home for herself.
"You are joking," said Niles in disgust. "She could have bought a property with the money she spent revamping herself? Are you kidding me? What a waste of money!"
"Pretty much. Don't look so shocked, Niles. Some women, especially celebrities, you know, spend great big bucks on plastic surgery. It's not unheard of. Don't tell me you don't know that already."
"What exactly did she have done?" asked Niles.
"I understand she had liposuction, a tummy tuck, massively large breast implants, but you probably know that already, and a facelift, and she says she feels as if she's 23 again. And I say good on her. Go, girl."
"She looks like a Barbie doll," Niles said rather heartlessly, "and that is not meant as a compliment. That was money very badly spent. I bet she looked 1,000 times better when she entered the surgeon's office than when she left it. Does she really think men think she's sexy? Honestly, the natural look is what most decent men like. Who wants to date a woman that looks like a made-up doll, with breasts so enormously large they look completely out of place, as if she's a comical cartoon character that everybody laughs at? I know I certainly don't appreciate a woman looking so fake. I'm sorry, love, everything about her is artificial, and that's why I'm so suspicious of her. Has she got a boyfriend? Because I'd like to know what he thinks about her radical transformations. I bet he's not a happy bunny."
"Well, from what Blakely tells me, Laura Ferguson does not just have one boyfriend, love, but many interested admirers, shall we say. Apparently they come to the house regularly, armed with bouquets of flowers and bottles of wine. So it seems there are men out there that fully appreciate Laura Ferguson's assets, even if men like yourself don't. In case you've forgotten, sometimes beauty is in the eye of the beholder, love."
Niles had looked at Suzanne in horror. His eyes widened in dismay. "Blakely told you that about all these men, coming over to Laura Ferguson's house with flowers and wine? My God, I didn't know things were as bad as this. You never told me. There is no prizes for guessing what these men want from Laura Ferguson. Are you telling me While our Blakely is spending time with Eloise under the Ferguson roof, that Eloise's mother is entertaining men in her own bedroom. I'm sorry, love. That's not appropriate, nor is it acceptable. I don't want our daughter being exposed to that. She's just turned 16, for goodness sake. Kids at her age are influenced by the environments they grow up in. That's why children who have parents who smoke all the time usually end up smoking themselves. Haven't you heard the saying, you become like the company you keep? Never was a truer word ever spoken.
What are you saying? Suzanne had protested rather indignantly. That our Blakely is going to end up dressing up like Laura Ferguson and entertaining all kinds of young men. Don't be ridiculous, Niles. Credit our daughter with a little common sense, would you? Blakely's a sensible kid. She knows that Laura Ferguson is over the top in every aspect of her life, and I very much doubt she wants to emulate that woman's tasteless example.
I'm not being ridiculous, love. I'm being deadly serious. I don't want Blakely spending time in Laura Ferguson's house. That woman will not be a good influence on Blakely. Why can't you see that? You seem to be defending her just because she's female. But look at the way she dresses. She's an absolute embarrassment. A train wreck, if you ask me. I certainly feel sorry for Eloise being exposed to her mother's vulgarities. I can only conclude that Laura Ferguson is extremely unstable, desperately insecure, and certainly attention-seeking. To go to such extremes with plastic surgery, well, that exposes all that, as far as I'm concerned. And let's just say there is nothing worse than a woman that is not comfortable in her own skin. So she has to go about changing everything about herself. That's a real red flag to me, love.
I don't think it's as straightforward as that, Suzanne had said. I think that Laura Ferguson has issues. That's probably why she dresses the way she does. Maybe getting attention from men makes her feel better about herself, boosts her self-esteem, so to speak. I think many women are like that, you know. A lot of women feel insecure about their bodies.
Too right, Laura Ferguson has issues. I couldn't have put it better myself, said Niles. You only have to look at the way she dresses to know that. I was picking Blakely up from school the other day and bumped into the woman. The skirt she was wearing, it was pathetic. It was so short. Oh, I didn't even know where to look. It screams out insecure to me, louder than any danger sign would. Which is why I keep telling you, love, that we should keep Blakely well away from the Fergusons.
You don't know the whole story, Niles, about Laura Ferguson. Maybe if you did, you'd be more sympathetic and more understanding and compassionate towards her. As I keep telling you, she's not all bad, you know. Don't they say you shouldn't judge a book by its cover? You, of all people, I would have thought would know that. Don't people deserve a chance? Imagine if someone turned up for an interview with you wearing shoddy clothes, simply because they didn't have enough money to buy anything decent. Are you going to turn them away when they could potentially turn out to be the greatest asset to your company?
Look, love, I never said Laura Ferguson was a bad person, did I? You misunderstand me completely. I'm saying the immoral way she dresses is cause for great concern. Whether she's nice or not, I don't care. For the record, if someone rocked up at an interview in my offices looking dishevelled, forgive me for being so shallow, but that would concern me greatly. There are, for the record, lots of immoral people out there that can be very nice, but it doesn't change the fact that they are immoral, and hanging around them is a very big mistake. When you hang around people of ignoble character, it changes who you become. If our daughter hung around people who shoplifted for the hell of it, or experimented with drugs, do you really think she wouldn't be tempted to do exactly the same? Especially at such a young age as she is now, only 16 years old. Teenagers always like to follow the crowd. If their friends smoke, they want to smoke as well. If their friends take drugs, they want to take drugs as well. If their friends shoplift, they will do it as well. It's just the way it is, especially with youngsters these days. They like to fit in and be accepted by their peers. It's very, very important to them. I know what you're trying to say, Niles, but let me explain to you something about Laura Ferguson for you to fully understand. Put yourself in Laura Ferguson's shoes for a moment, Niles, will you? Said Suzanne rather sharply. Laura told me that at the time she wondered why her husband had walked off and abandoned her and their daughter. So in her depression and lugubrious melancholia, she began to eat gallons of ice cream to comfort herself. She ballooned from £140 to £300. I'm not sure if she's exaggerating about that. I can't imagine the woman was ever big. She told me when she heard her ex-husband had remarried and now had a new wife that was expecting a baby, she got so mad. She drove around to his new address and spied on the new wife to see what the woman was like. I guess she was comparing herself to the woman. She thought that her ex-husband had exchanged her for a better model, found himself a more attractive woman, and I think that hit her so hard. So she decided to do something about it. She went on a strict diet, lost tons of weight, and she told me she wanted her ex-husband to realize what he'd lost by reinventing herself, so that is what she did. She opted for some radical surgeries. She now feels confident about herself and claims she's living her life to the fullest, and I commend her for that. Your criticism of her is heartless, Niles. Rejection can be so destroying for a woman, you know. So rather than being so judgmental towards her, can't you be a wee bit sympathetic? I'm quite sure Laura Ferguson can be trusted to watch over Blakely when she's over at Eloise's house. I mean, look at her daughter Eloise. That young girl is a lovely young lady. So Mrs. Ferguson is doing something right, because her daughter is very well put together, very grounded, don't you think? Laura Ferguson's obviously had it tough, Niles agreed. I commend her for getting her act together, I really do, and for raising a very eloquent, well-behaved young lady as a daughter. But it doesn't take away the fact that she's deeply insecure, and inviting all those men around to her house is not a good look. And I don't want Al Blakely being exposed to all that. Why is that so hard for you to understand, love? It's common sense, isn't it? Look at the story about the woman in the jungle raised by monkeys. She became like a monkey. I don't want our daughter, God forbid, turning into Laura Ferguson. That would be my worst nightmare being realised. What do you mean? You don't want our daughter exposed to that? Big deal, Laura Ferguson invites a man over to the house from time to time, when our daughter is spending time with Eloise under her roof. What harm can be done over that? The children are together, aren't they? They probably don't even notice what Laura Ferguson is getting up to. I'm quite sure she's very discreet about her relationships with other men. Open your eyes, love. You're sounding foolish. I'm sorry, but I'm going to spell it out to you. Laura Ferguson dresses like a hooker. She probably has the morals of an alley cat. I didn't want to say that, but I'm going to say it. For the record, I very much doubt that she knows the meaning of the word discreet, from what Blakely is saying about the men that rock up at her house, while both Eloise and Blakely are there. How can she allow that to happen? She should not be entertaining men with the kids around. I wouldn't be surprised if Laura Ferguson's house hasn't turned into a bus station, with all the men heading for destination Laura Ferguson. I don't want any weird men like that hanging around Al Blakely, any more than I'd want her to hang around a field of landmines. Something's going to explode. She's 16 years old, for goodness sake. Keep your hair on, love. If there is a man at Laura Ferguson's house, I very much doubt he's going to be hanging around a couple of 16-year-old kids, let me tell you. Blakely and Eloise are best friends now. Do you really want to drive a wedge between the two of them? They like each other so much, and Blakely thoroughly enjoys spending time at Eloise's home, and vice versa. You can't take that away from our daughter, surely not. They've only known each other for a few months now, and Blakely has never had a best friend like Eloise before. Give her a break, won't you? I've never seen her so happy. She never made many friends at the school before Eloise came along. They really connected. They're both reasonably athletic, love nature and indigenous wild animals. They have so much in common. Would you deny our daughter a best friend like this? Look, love, I'm not laying down the law. I'm giving you advice. If you want Blakely to spend time with Eloise at the Ferguson house, be my guest. I'm not going to stop you from doing it. But let me tell you this. If Blakely starts playing up, I'm not going to be the one that says I told you so. And if I hear that any of those men that Laura Ferguson has been entertaining at her house have been chatting inappropriately to our girl, there will be hell to pay. Do you understand what I'm saying? I'm relying on you, love, to do the right thing by our daughter. Think about everything I've told you, and you make the decisions. I'm not here all the time, so I can't stop you from doing what you're going to do. But I'm trusting you to watch Laura Ferguson very carefully, as if your life depended on it.
As Suzanne reflected over her husband's sagacious words, she realised they'd come back to bite her. Niles had been absolutely right about Laura Ferguson all along. The woman was a bad influence on her daughter, if Blakely's petulant, cantankerous outbursts were anything to go by. Blakely had admitted that when nobody was around that Laura Ferguson swore like a sailor, which was why when her belligerent daughter had sworn at her last night, when they'd had an altercation together, that Susan had been horrified by the filth that had come out of her daughter's mouth, that needed to be rinsed out with soap and water. Her husband's words rang in her head like a resounding bell.
You become like the company you keep.
I don't even know Laura Ferguson terribly well, she told herself, but I trusted a perfect stranger to watch over my girl, whom my husband didn't believe deserved to be trusted, and he was right about that. So there we are, that is the end of part 1 of our story. Part 2 is tomorrow night. I look forward to you joining me then. Until next time, goodbye and good night.